All right, hello and welcome to the Ironworks deck tech. I'm just going to push the sideboard out for a second here. We'll look at that in a bit. So this is a deck that we recently saw some guy by the name of moto name of Discover N kind of bring to Moto, and it utilizes Krark-Clan Ironworks, which is a card that has always been fringe playable, but is now really explosive and can win. I've actually won in one of my leagues on turn two. So essentially, it's because of the printing of Scrap Trawler. And I'm just going to go over that really quick before I go over the deck. So basically how the deck works is you get a Krark-Clan Ironworks in play, and then you just make a ton of mana, and using Scrap Trawler, every time you sack an artifact, you sort of like cascade one from your graveyard essentially back in your hand. So essentially when you have the Scrap Trawler in play, any Prism gets you back any Star or Sphere, any Star Sphere gets you back to Mox Opal. So essentially that draws you the cards, the stars in the sphere, and then the Opal, generates you 3 mana every iteration because you play the Opal, you tap it, then you sack it to the Ironworks. That gives you 3 mana, including a colored mana. And then when you play another Terrarium, it just keeps coming back. So you just make an immense amount of mana. And before, these decks needed to play they needed to play Fate's Reward, they needed to play Open the Vaults, which is a huge color commitment and also puts you in a spot where, you don't necessarily, you won't be able to play and Open the Vaults the same turn you play in Ironworks. Scrap Trawler costs 3 colorless. So a lot of the times, you actually, it's kind of like a, what is a good, it's kind of like almost like a Splinter Twin kind of thing, where you can play both on your turn and win. Like, you play the Krark-Clan Ironworks, you sack whatever extraneous artifacts you have, play a Scrap Trawler, then right away you get your engine going. You get really low on artifacts, but the Trawler feeds himself. So, and you combo really hard. This is not a combo. This is a combo deck that I actually recommend to beginners because it's kind of like you just do your thing, and once you get your 2 cards in play, it's very close to Splinter Twin. It's very hard for them to win. Obviously, there's other factors, but let's go ahead and get into the deck tech. So this deck has been modified. This from the original version that Frank Lepore also did a video on it, and some people are playing it on Moto. I'm kind of a deck tuner, and I saw some holes in the deck, and I tried to patch them up a little bit. First things first, I went ahead and added 2 Botanical Sanctums, cutting a Tendo Ice Bridge and Academy Ruins. Basically, I just wanted a bit better mana. I would like to play 4 Sanctums, but a lot of the times you want your 4th land to come on to play tap for Ironworks, so you can't really play 4 because you're putting too much of a risk there. But yeah, adds green and blue, cast your spells. Usually is just kind of a tropical island, so it's pretty good. 4 Darksteel Citadel, this is probably the most important land in the deck, because with Krark-Clan Ironworks, essentially you're getting 2 mana back. And you play the Ironworks, and then your Citadel gives you 2 mana back, turns on your Opals. Citadel's insane. It's a really broken Magic card, especially with Mox Opal, so it's good. Forest, basic Forest, it's actually possible that it should be a basic island, but I think that Stirrings is probably more important than Crane. Essentially, this is there for if you get pathed or ghost quartered, which happens. So pathing your Scrap Trawler is kind of a bad beat, but if you have that force to get, giving you that extra mana is really big because you're comboing off with big rampy spells. 2 Inventor's Fair. This is another land that's really, really good, but it's a legendary, and a lot of the times I've actually drawn 2 a lot, but it's essentially a tutor. It gets you half of the combo, whether it be Ironworks or Scrap Trawler. Very, very solid card, and the random life gain is really good in Modern, because there are some decks that you get that rolling, and it's really hard for them to really mount an offensive to beat that. Sanctum of Ugin. Now, this is the weird part of the deck. So, Sanctum of Ugin and Battlesphere. What does this do for the deck? Well, Battlesphere is a card that you can just win on its own, right? If you play an Ironworks, you can ramp into it, and it's very important because this lets you beat Graveyard Hate. If they have Rest in Peace, or if they have a Relic, or a Line of the Void, your Scrap Trawler doesn't work, but you can still just play a Battlesphere, sack a Sanctum to get Emrakul. But importantly, when you're comboing, this gives you essentially more copies of the Battlesphere with the Sanctum, because what will happen is, if I have, for instance, Ironworks plus Battlesphere but no Trawler, you can play the Battlesphere, you get 5 Mirror tokens, so that gives you 10 potential energy worth of mana off the Ironworks, and then you sack the Sanctum to get the Trawler, and then you just combo off. You play the Trawler, then you go off. So it essentially gives you more copies of the Trawler while also being a card that wins you the game on its own. And as you'll see in my videos, a lot of the times, I'll just play a Battlesphere, it makes 5/1/1s, I'll just sack the Sanctum and get an Emrakul right away. So your soft combo is versatile because you can just, kind of skip the trawler part. But yeah, Sanctum is pivotal. I think it's very, very good, and you should definitely play it. Tendo Ice Bridge, you just need some Utopia land for your sideboard, and is reasonable. Normally, you only need colored spells a few times. Once you start going off, you have lots of Mox Opal mana. 3 Everflowing Chalice. Now, I've cut the Mishra's Baubles from the deck. A few reasons. One, I want to potentially test it for San Antonio, so if the Baubles are going in another deck. But two, you feel a little mana starved sometimes in these decks, and Everthrowing Chalice is strong. You normally cast it for 2, but the reason that you need it over like Mind Stone is that it costs 0, which essentially means when you're comboing off with Scrap Trawler and an Ironworks, whenever you sack a 1 mana spell, you get a 0 mana spell back. So, and that even goes when you have 2 Trawlers, you need 2 zeros, that gives you even more mana. So it's important to have like more zeros than just the opals, because obviously when you have the opal, everything's great, but when you don't have the opal, it's nice to have a 0 because that really helps you generate a lot of mana. Every time you sack a star, you can just play the child for 0 and sack it. Extra mana early is good because a lot of times you get stuck. Sometimes you get to cast it for 2 and a bunch of stuff to kind of empty your hand and set up a big turn. And also just ramp for Battlesphere, which you can get with Sanctum. So I think the chalices are good. I think 3 might be too many, but I'm just trying that out. Ancient Stirrings. Let's talk about Ancient Stirring and Glintnest Crane. Those are your colored spells. They just make the deck run so smoothly. They tutor for any card in your deck, and they do it at such a cheap cost. Like, it's kind of unreal that these cards, how powerful these cards are. Ancient Stirring is obviously an include, but the Moto list is playing Thoughtcast, and I'll tell you right now that Glintnest Crane is better by a lot. If you're trying to play this deck and you're frustrated, like, you'll learn very quickly that Thoughtcast doesn't really do a lot because it only draws you cards when you have a bunch of stuff in play. And what happens with this deck is you play all your stuff, but then you just have all these spheres in play and you need to actually sack them to draw cards and like find your pieces, which means the Thoughtcast is not always going to be that cheap. Not to mention Crane, you can play it on turn 2. So if you're missing a piece, like a sideboard, even a sideboard card or a combo piece, the Crane comes down, it's defensive, and notably, like, while you can cast it on turn 2, it actually digs you deeper. Like, a lot of the times late game, you'd rather look at the top 4 than draw 2 off of Thoughtcast, because you're just going to draw into more, like, lands, mana things that cost you mana, and just cycle, but you'd rather just, instead of cycling, instead of drawing 2 cyclers to go 4D that costs you a lot of mana, you'd rather just hit the cards. So Crane is really, really sick, and there are some matchups where it's really good because you're playing against like a Death Shadow deck or an aggro deck, and you just have this really good blocker. So I've kind of itemized that out a little bit better in my article, but I definitely would recommend playing Crane over Thoughtcast. Now we have 12 Chromatic Spheres, Chromatic Stars, Terrarian. Let's pull the Pirate Spellbomb out. So this is kind of like your engine. These cycle. They make you combo. Star and Terrarian add you mana when they die, which is nice with Ironworks. That makes Sphere the worst one. Pretty self-explanatory. You just need lots of artifacts. When you're playing games, a lot of the times, this deck isn't Tron. So when you're playing this deck, and you'll see, don't just sack your spheres right away, because you're just going to draw into more spheres. What you want to do is you want to set up turns where you have enough mana that, like, if you draw Stirrings, or you draw an Ironworks, or you draw a Trawler, you can play them. Because when you play the Ironworks, you kind of want these to be in play. That way you have enough mana to combo. So do not play these and cycle them really quickly. Hopefully you can see the pacing in my video. If I need something in particular, I might cycle them, but I'm really, really waiting. Like, a lot of times I play a star and I wait a few turns. Unless I have nothing to do, I'm usually going to wait a few turns. 1 Pirate Spellbomb, another difference between me and the Moto list. I want to have a card that potentially beats like an Ensnaring Bridge, or a weird situation where, your Emrakul gets exiled, or they have like a Drowner of Hope, so they can tap your Emrakul down or something like that. Having 1 card, and Spellbomb's enough, and it's not even that bad because it's kind of like a sphere, but it gives you some versatility to be able to kill Eidolon in game 1, which is pretty nice, and it can also kill cards like Goblin Guide and stuff like that. Not as essential cards, but Thalia, maybe a Tidehollow Scholar, cards that are going to disrupt you. I think Pirate's Spellbomb is really good. It lets you beat weird situations. It's kind of hard to use on Moto, but when you combo, it's pretty easy to kill them with Pirate's Spellbomb. So I definitely, if you're playing this deck in paper, I would play it, and on Moto, I think it's important too. 3 Wellsprings, 3 Prisms. I just kind of had this realization. I do this deck after the video because if something like important thoughts happen, I can kind of like get ahead and get you guys ideas flowing on them for the video itself. I actually think that maybe, especially with the sideboard the way it is, that you should probably play 4 Prisms and 3 Wellspring and 2 Wellsprings. I saw that the Moto guy, the Discover N / Frank Lepore, whoever you want to call it, played 4 Wellsprings, 2 Prisms. The extra card off like once you're sacking the Wellspring to a Krark-Clan Ironworks, if you're doing that, you're generally winning the game because you're going off with Trawler or you're playing a Battlesphere. Like that free extra card value is just nonsense. If you had another way of sacking artifacts, maybe it's good, but I honestly think that Prism is likely better than Wellspring. So I'm going to make that change for the next event. 4 Scrap Trawlers, 4 Krark-Clan Ironworks. We already talked about this. Battlesphere Emrakul. That's your win condition, and that's the main deck. I would watch the videos to kind of see how I pace my spheres, how the comboing actually works. Don't be daunted. Like most people that are watching this know me and know that I'm not a combo player. I'm the big fat green deck or like ramp deck kind of player, aggro deck, I guess. Like any creature deck basically. This is kind of out of my comfort zone, but I feel pretty good playing this deck. I think that it's pretty easy to combo. It's got a straightforward plan. Like you're stirring, like you cycle your cards, you generate mana early, your stirrings and your cranes dig you for the pieces you need. That's pretty much it. Let's look at the sideboard here. Okay, 1 Padim. So this card is kind of an experiment. I think that this deck can kind of have trouble with Culligan's command decks, and a lot of those decks will like leave in Lightning Bolt and take out Terminate, or they have Fatal Push, and Padim is actually kind of a way of like, it's really gross when you're getting beat down and they just have Culligan's Command up, and you're like, well, I can play my Ironworks, and if I try to go off, they're just going to Culligan's Command me. This way you can play the Padim first and then combo off, and it also just provides a ton of value. Like it's a reasonable blocker, draws you extra cards, gives all your artifacts hexproof, which is really nice. Costs a lot. You've got to be careful setting in cards that cost a lot, but I think it's reasonable. 2 Fatal Push. It's possible it should be 3. There are some matchups like Death Shadow and Burn, and even decks like Affinity, where a 1 mana like kill anything kind of spell, even I bring this in against Eldrazi Tron 2, is super impactful for the cost, and can be really, really nice for this deck, because sometimes like when you're not doing your combo, you have some extra mana laying around, and to be able to use like 1 of it is really nice. Just a solid card. Also deals with problematic permanents like Thalia, Gatatig, Eidolon mainly. 2 Battle at the Bridge. This is just kind of a... You can't sideboard too many cards, so this is kind of like the sideboard card that's in there that doesn't get used that often, but it's pretty potent. It's really good against Burn or any aggressive deck. The ability to like kill an Eidolon with it and not lose damage and gain a bunch of life is really nice. It also just has this kind of like weird, like I win the game clause, like against an aggro deck. If you build up a bunch of artifacts, you could take a turn off to like kill their best guy and gain, 2 to 5 life or whatever. Pretty potent. Maybe shouldn't be in there, but when you do play against like, the Burning Tree Emissary or Eidolon burn decks, it's pretty nice to have, and I do side it in sometimes as a one of. Definitely maybe the weakest card in the sideboard. All right, 1 Ancient Grudge. You don't actually have red mana lands, so I don't like having too many Ancient Grudges, but the idea here is I want a nice split to be able to deal with artifacts, to be able to deal with, like, if they have a Spellskite to protect, or if they have a Chalice. I like having this mix, so Ancient Grudge kind of goes with these, so I'll talk about all these together. 2 Seals, 2 Nature's Claims. So it's important. A couple things are important here. 1, having the split of Nature's Claims and Seals lets you beat Chalice, which Eldrazi Tron plays and some other strange decks play. And number 2 is that a lot of the times, like, using Seal can be better, because if you're like cracking a star or sphere, you want to draw a card to float a green mana, you're only going to have a green mana on your main phase. So playing the Seal there is pretty nice. So that's kind of the reasoning. And also, Seal can be good. Like, I've lost to Eldrazi before when they've, like, played a Stony Sands with Stubborn Denial backup. So actually being able to, like, cast the Seal early to prevent that is also nice. Ancient Grudge, like, you don't have any green lands, like I said. It's just kind of in there to help out. It's a really potent sideboard card, like really good against Affinity, really good against, I guess, other Marvel decks, really good against, random decks like Amulet can be nice. So I do like one Grudge. Like I said, you don't sideboard much with this deck, so you want the colored spells that you side. It's very similar to Affinity. You want the colored spells that come in to have a huge impact because you're boarding in like 3 cards. 2 Pyroclasm, similar to that. If you play against aggro decks, if you play against elves, if you play against Affinity, if you play against, an Eidolon deck, if you play against some, what am I missing here? Maybe like I've even boarded this in against, what have I boarded in this against? I can't really think right now, but Pyroclasm comes in a lot. Oh, like a tokens deck. It can be really nice. Like maybe even a Grixis Delver deck with Pyromancer or something like that. It comes in a lot and can buy you a ton of time. Pretty self-explanatory. 3 Grafdigger's Cage. You can find it off Stirrings and Crane. So just having that graveyard hate, like I said, is really nice. Even though Dredge is kind of on a downswing, and this card doesn't deal with Living End, it's kind of nice to just have it, like against those kind of decks, and you can tutor it. So 3 is really potent. That's the deck. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you watch the videos. I put up 5 this week, a whole league. So enjoy, and thanks for tuning in.